topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. This is an interview that has been long in the making. I say long because the first time I heard about David Clements, I said, wait a minute here. Here is an award-winning professor who, really got kind of, drawn into this battle of election integrity because like so many of us, according to Rasmussen, something like 60% of America believes that something fishy happened in 2020. I guess we're all election deniers. That's a title that we all should wear proudly because I believe someday the truth will finally come out because it does have a way of finding its way out. And I think it's one of those things that, like sin, as the Bible would talk about, is that you can pay for it early or later. The idea is that the longer you wait to pay for that sin, the more complicated and the more painful it becomes. And I believe that we're going to see this being realized as well when it comes to what happened in the 2020 elections. Professor David Clements is an award-winning business law professor and prosecutor. He's passionately pursued the truth that, as I said, over 60% of Americans are demanding regarding the 2020 presidential elections. The pursuit of the truth has cost him his professorship and income. And the cost to his family, you can only imagine. The professor now applies his experience to the realm of elections. His advocacy has led to audits and canvassing operations being implemented across the country, with some efforts resulting in elimination of election machines that facilitates fraud. Professor Clements is also the creator of this incredible documentary that if you had not seen it, you need to get in front of it. Let My People Go. Professor David Clements, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Well, I got to tell you again, it's an honor to have you here, and I have such high regard for you, for your passion, but your conviction on behalf of so many of us. You are doing something that many, are joined with you in spirit, if nothing else, and that is to find out what the heck happened in 2020. Our government isn't interested in it. We had a faux Jan 6, committee, which was problematic. They wanted to look at January 6th, but they didn't want to look at the causal relationship with what, caused January 6th, right?
Yeah. Like many people, I think the only thing that separates me from the average American is that I just happen to have credentials that were relevant to a legal analysis or that of a prosecutor. So November 3rd stood out to me as a crime. Mm-hmm. And I'm wired as an investigator, and against many cautions to keep my mouth shut, I decided that I would rather be judged by my colleagues than history. Because when you see evil, to the extent that we're seeing it, you really have to do something. And I just didn't want to be the person that wondered, in 2020. You read about the storybook lives of the American founders. I just didn't want to be someone that was a bystander. And so with that has come great praise from people that recognize the work and great damnation from those that think that I'm an election denier and a conspiracy theorist and all those things. So you have to take both.
Yeah. When David, when November 3rd happened and you witnessed what went on, what was it that threw up red flags for you immediately? And what did you subsequently discover to seal up this conviction to the degree that you were willing to put it all on the line?
The first thing was censorship. I think anytime any apparatus silences your voice, then you have to ask the question, why are they doing that?
Right.
And it was so unnerving how people were being deplatformed and silenced and taken off of YouTube, and you couldn't ask questions.
Right.
And so that got my attention. I think if we would have had a freer discourse, maybe my hackles wouldn't have been raised. But just the full frontal assault of just, you can't ask questions about the things that you saw on November 3rd, and there was so much to see.
Right. Did any of the lead up to the election, did that give you any kind of warning? I mean, for me, I saw the clear disparity. It's almost like it is right now. That is that if you go to a Donald Trump campaign stop, or if you even watch it on television, thousands upon thousands of people are there, yelling for Trump and USA, very patriotically. And by comparison, when you see Joe Biden, there's hardly anybody there. So, traditionally in politics, you can almost sense the momentum and where the enthusiasm is. I mean, we witnessed this clearly in both campaigns. For example, with Barack Obama. Barack Obama brought out thousands of people. And so it wasn't that far-fetched to see him, winning the election, although I would say his reelection was a little bit questionable because his polling numbers were so terrible, and the people, had sustained a lot of pain because of his policies. But nonetheless, they decided to stay the course. Somewhat plausible. But something like this was just so obvious in terms of the popular movement of Donald Trump. I mean, David, I happened to go through 12 states in October, right before the election. And I ask people this all the time. I said, guess how many signs for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that I saw, traveling through 12 different states. And I only saw three signs. That's it. Either a sign or a bumper sticker, only three. Whereas even when I was in California, the beachhead for the Democratic Party, I mean, they were holding boat parades. There was, car parades down in San Diego for him. It was, there was just a lot of energy, for Donald Trump. So to me, those early signs were indications that, that Donald Trump had a lot of momentum. And so this struck in contrast with the results that were reported to us, after the election.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think one of the things that we've had to get used to is our common sense and our intuition has been staring at the truth if we would just consider what our eyes are looking at. Yet we're usually gaslit by the media. That's just an anecdote. Oh, you're that's not scientific polling. It's not scientific this. And I think what we've come to realize is that the enemy is much smaller in numbers than the American people, but they wield a very, very powerful weapon. And
Exactly.
that's the megaphone of legacy media.
Mhm.
And so we've kind of been beaten into submission to thinking that the truth is only the truth if you hear it through one of your, mainstream media pundits.
Mhm.
And I think we're waking up to that.
I think so too. It's quite the wake-up call. We're talking with Professor David Clements, the award-winning business law professor and prosecutor, talking about, is it possible to unrig any election? David, I would agree with you is that, even after the election, we had 1,000 sworn affidavits. I mean, people need to understand in the context of the legal system, that is a serious document. When you have 1,000 people signing a legal document attesting to a crime or some legal infraction that occurred during election, and it seemed that the court was not interested in adjudicating those.
Yeah, that's true. And when I try to bring this to people's attention, how many people that were prosecuted for lying in those sworn affidavits? Zero. And the
Yeah.
number is actually closer to about 5,000 nationwide.
Is it 5,000? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. There's not all affidavits are created, the same, but there were 7,000 in Michigan alone that were delivered based on human deviations that they saw because Wayne County in particular was such a nightmare for election transparency. This is the place where you had people driving up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, unloading more fraudulent mail-in ballots to be counted. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because in some respects, when I go out and travel and speak with people, a lot of our meetings devolve into kind of the equivalent of an AA meeting where we all remark
Right.
upon the forms of fraud that we've witnessed and observed.
Mhm.
And it's cathartic, right? To talk with other folks, to reassure them, you're not crazy. Your common sense works. Um, but yeah, the question of how to unrig an election, is it possible? And I guess that's what we'll wrestle with today. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that it was possible,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that it's not going to take a wartime effort. But part of starting the process is to see the problem for what it is.
Mhm.
And I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen is that we keep buying into this incremental framework where no one wants to seem foolish or overstep. And so they really spend most of their time dealing with front end fixes to the system or co-opting the talking points of the RNC and Democrats, namely, we have to embrace ballot chasing or early voting, or
Mhm.
maybe the machines aren't that bad. And I think that's a dangerous prescription. I think that there's only one way to run an honest election. You have to have transparency
Mhm.
all the way through. And anytime you embrace a system that obliterates chain of custody, where you've got
Exactly.
ballots that can just be around for 3 weeks to a month, and then you give the opposition over a month to count those ballots. You've got basically 60 days to create as much havoc and chaos, and it really favors the dishonest party.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so what we're being told is, if you want to beat the Democrats, you got to become like one. And I think there's a much wiser approach to it, which is let's go from open-ended systems that can be subverted along that assembly line
Mhm.
and get back to the closed systems that we used for the better part of 180 years.
Exactly.
And they worked. They weren't perfect, but they sure are better than what we use today.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, why continue to use something? I mean, even when you go back, I mean, now the Democrats are, kind of open to admit the cheating that took place in the 1960 election. I mean, because there was an after midnight result. It looked like Richard Nixon was going to be the president, and then the next morning we wake up and nope, not Richard Nixon. It's John Kennedy, and there was talk, that there was some cheating done. Now it's an admission of the Democratic Party, that said, which I thought was interesting. They admitted, said, well, if the truth be known, uh, actually Richard Nixon won. We cheated in Illinois and a couple of other key areas, and that's how we were able to, bring John F. Kennedy across the finish line and make him, the president of the United States of America. I mean, and to make that statement, David, so casually, it's like, well, wait a minute, what are we? Where's our integrity?
Hmm.
What is America all about? If we think we can game the system and be like Harry Reid, for example, in his comment about about a presidential candidate, he said, well, he didn't get elected president, right? This was Mitt Romney. Yeah, he didn't get elected president, so his shenanigans and his lying there in the well of the Senate made up because they got what they wanted, and that was they got Barack Obama, and Mitt Romney wasn't elected president.
Yeah, I think it's beyond tiresome how duplicitous um, the radical left is, because they're really good at forgetting history.
Mhm.
And so if Trump, wins in November, all the things they've been projecting onto our movement, which is about transparent elections, all of a sudden you're going to have a ton of people that have questions over these machines.
Yeah.
And how do I know that? Because during the 2016 administration up until 2020, every Democrat was talking about these machines being wide open.
Right.
And it was as if they were projecting the scenario that if Trump had seized the machines, and many of them expected to have done that in 2020
Mhm.
because of the deviations. Now, Trump had the legal authority to do so, but had he done so, you would have had an amazing library of Democrat talking heads, from Amy Klobuchar, Hillary Clinton,
Oh yeah.
Kamala Harris, all talking about the dangers of these machines.
Mhm.
But when he didn't seize them, they didn't know what to do. So they basically took all of those talking points, put them into a broom closet along with their experts, and that would be Harry Hursty, Philip Stark, Alex J. Halberman, never to be heard from.
Mm.
But I'm telling you right now, because they're duplicitous, because they have no shame, when Trump overwhelms the fraud and overwhelms the corruption because he is so historically popular in contrast to the most unpopular president that I think I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Right.
They will bring those arguments out, but only when it's convenient to their party. It has nothing to do with the truth, has everything to do with who's in power and who is not.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, no doubt. Well, look what they did. I mean, in 2016, they kneecapped him. They threw up false charges, which we all know was a big lie. And what price did Hillary Clinton pay for, dumping this into the political system? I mean, a big lie, the Russian collusion lie. I mean, she barely got a slap on the hand. I mean, she destroyed evidence. And then you get James Comey coming out and giving all these reasons why she shouldn't be indicted, but refuses to indict her with some sort of twisted logic. Unbelievable, almost like the same logic. I don't know if prosecutors are using the same playbook, because it's almost like the same thing that happened recently with Robert Hur, right? Here's all these reasons that we should indict Joe Biden for the mishandling of documents that he even when he was vice president was illegal for him to have a hand on. And, and the way he was storing them haphazardly and that, but because he's feeble minded, no reasonable jury would convict him. So let's not bother. Well, my goodness. I mean, you're telling the whole world something the whole world already knows anyway, that Joe Biden's mental condition is compromised. But now legally, you've told the world that he's mentally incapable.
Yeah. So, enter the 25th Amendment. I mean, he shouldn't
Yeah.
be serving as president if you're going to make a concession that he shouldn't be able to stand trial because he's incapacitated. And, but this is projection, and this is the use of the sword and the shield. So you see a level of projection, everything that they're claiming that Trump is guilty of, they in fact are guilty of. And it's effective because when you project through primacy, your victim or your target is on the defensive. They basically have to respond to vicious lies. And that's basically what Trump had to deal with the entirety of his first term. I think the American people have become more hip to that. It's usually a good idea to just wait 48 to 72 hours to let the dust settle to see if there's anything to it.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we're getting another dose of the persecution against Trump in the Michael Cohen trial.
Right.
Apparently, Michael Cohen completely obliterated their attorney-client privilege, had secret recordings that made their way into the proceedings today. Looked like he had an inappropriate relationship with Stormy Daniels herself.
Mm-hmm.
And, the truth is there for anyone with eyes to see. But it's interesting to see the take or the slant, depending on which news organization's covering the trial. But I think the American people are seeing right through it.
I sure hope they are. It's just so overwhelming. But like you said, with the Democratic Party and those that do not like Trump, I mean, they have control. They have levers, control of levers of all these institutions, our government, the Justice Department. They control the media. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard are all in the tank for the left. And so they're doing everything to control. Of course, we know BlackRock controls the newsrooms across the country. This is why the talking points are so consistent. It doesn't matter if you're even watching Fox or if you tune into CNN, you go, wow, where did I hear that? Well, wait a minute. I'm watching a Democratic, party biased station, and they're echoing the statements of supposedly a conservative media outlet. Quite interesting.
Well, we have to improve the system architecture because I know people are waking up.
Mm-hmm.
We look no further than the rally that Trump just held in New Jersey,
right?
With over 100,000 people cramming onto the beach in a state that he supposedly lost. And I have to remind people of Banana Republic or countries that have lost their way in Brazil. the crowds were overwhelmingly in favor of Bolsonaro. In Venezuela, before its fall, you had packed crowds for the populist candidate. But in both of those countries, you had rigged election architecture. So you could basically bus in a small number of token supporters for the Marxist communist candidate. And if you compare that anecdotally again to the wild populist candidate, it didn't matter because enthusiasm doesn't transfer over to a software subversion where someone by virtue of a keystroke can inflate your voter rolls, backfill and overwrite data, and ensure that selected candidates make it through instead of the will of the people. And that's where we're at right now.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, many of the Republican talking heads, many of the people that I call conservative Inc., continue to just absolutely ignore the most vital piece of the puzzle, which is what makes ballot harvesting go. And it's the machines, it's the metrics, it's the data points that are provided through the use of the software that allows for bad actors and mules to go to strategic locations and just start dumping fake and fraudulent ballots into these Zuckerberg-funded drop boxes. And until we've got a solution for that problem, we're just going to have to get used to this, getting on each other's shows and kind of just complaining and lamenting. I'm past that. I want to get to a place where we go from open-ended architecture to closed systems that we used. I mean, you're old enough, I'm old enough to remember counting being done in a precinct location that could be a neighbor's garage.
Exactly.
You had a Democrat table, Republican table. You had hand countings, you had paper poll books where people were being checked in by hand, being given a physical ballot. And everything was focused on one day, election.
Exactly. I was going to say it was completed in one day. We're talking with David Clements, the award-winning business law professor and prosecutor. David, yes, that's the deal. One day. I mean, I've been saying for a long time, we should just have a national day off. I mean, our elections are so important. We call time out on everything. We take that day off. And I think, we proved in primaries that everybody can count the ballots in one day. I haven't heard of any state that it took, several months or weeks after the election to count the ballots for a primary election. So it demonstrates that it can be done, right?
Well, it can be, but here's the deal. If you're not the selected candidate, they'll keep finding more ballots to count until the paper totals basically match the digital subversion.
Right.
And so in places like California, it's not unusual to be 3-4 weeks after an election, and they're still finding votes to prop up their selected candidates. So yeah, it's not a question of whether we're capable. It's just recognizing that without the rule of law placing hard and fast limits on when you can count the votes, it's just kabuki theater.
Exactly.
And that's going to be the tough slog ahead, is that none of your legislators, none of your election administrators are interested in these fixes, because it would actually undermine their own power. And that's the biggest hurdle, is people saying, look, I'm going to defend the system, because if I don't defend it, I'm basically admitting that I might have gotten through an election that I probably shouldn't be your clerk, or I shouldn't be your state rep, or I shouldn't be your judge. So none of them are interested in making the corrections, because if you were to make the corrections, the will of the people would be made known. Now, there have been some places where we've enjoyed success in hand counts. Gillespie County, Texas, for instance, in a Republican primary in Texas, they were able to do a hand count. They decided to not use the machines at all in very large precincts. These were like 2,000 person precincts. And they were able to count everything in one day with no problems. So it can be done, but there's a lot of gaslighting and bullying from the election vendors and from the lobbies to say that this is untenable. The American people are just too stupid to count up to 500. And that's what we're up against right now.
Yeah, because as if the machines are so much smarter, and they're proving that they're far from it. It's not about being smart. It's about delivering an outcome that is expected by those who have purchased the machines, have put them in play. And what's happening here in America as you know, Professor, I mean, it's been happening around the world. I mean, the echoes of discrepancies with these machines has been consistent, right? I mean, I am not hearing in other countries, for example, where people are just lauding the praises of these machines and saying, well, these are the best things ever. If anything, I'm hearing, questions and confusion like we're hearing here in America.
Yeah, and you'll always have those questions because they're not auditable.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
it's like living in the Prohibition era,
Mhm.
and if you wanted to tour a gangster's speakeasy, they'll give you a tour of the kitchen, the bathroom, but that locked door,
Right.
that's what they're not letting you, go in there and take a look to see if there's something illegal going on. And we have the equivalent through what looks like robust laws for risk limiting audits and things like that. But they have designed all of their auditing practices to deprive you of the very records that tell you whether these machines have been subverted or not.
Mhm.
And until we get a grip on that, you're going to see more of the same. But yeah, people tend to not trust things that they don't understand and that they can't see, or they're being bullied into just taking at face value.
Exactly.
And you can't do that with elections. It's got to be a zero trust
Mhm.
um, manner of doing things, because look, we have our politics through adversarial political parties. It's built on a zero trust model, and
Right.
that's fine. You don't
Mhm.
have to, as long as people can see the processes, then I think they can live with losing even a race that they might be very, very passionate about. I
Mhm.
think most Americans are used to not getting what they want when it comes to their political representation. But what they will not, put up with is question marks on whether the process itself is legitimate. And um, you mentioned 60% of the entire country. Right now, it's about 80% of Republicans that have lost all faith in our election system, 64% of independents, and Democrats are now crossing that 50% mark. So it's
Wow.
a clear majority of all
Yes.
Americans that
Mhm.
want transparency.
Right. Well, David, what happens here? I mean, look at, I think that in 2020, the leap was so humongous, for those in the Democratic Party to, tell us that Joe Biden won with 80 million votes when Barack Obama didn't even get close. Donald Trump gets 10 million more than he did previous. There's been no other president who has gotten more votes in a reelection campaign and has lost like Donald Trump. I mean, these are all, possibilities and question marks that remain in the minds of America that, whether you want to blame it on Joe Biden or the apparatchik of the Democratic Party and this cabal that was behind what many people are calling a coup, they're not interested in the truth. But we, the people, must be interested because that's our integrity. That's what our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our rule of law. I mean, what happens next? I mean, do we just think that, okay, I'm coming to a stop sign? Well, that's a Democrat that's in that car, and he may choose not to stop at that stop sign because he's a Democrat. I mean, is
Yeah.
it getting that ridiculous?
Well, yeah, it's been that ridiculous. Look, what we have to do is deploy a level of focus that we're not good at. To be frank,
Yeah.
everyone has their issue, and they need to understand that your issue, whatever it is downstream from the ballot box. And so this is a triage focus that we have to stop the bleeding. You're not going to get policy that works for you at the border. You're not going to get policy that works for you when it comes to mandates and COVID. If you're all about the pro-life movement, great. But unless you get a handle on that machine that's used,
Yes.
don't expect to see legislation that reflects the will of the people. You're going to see something that reflects the will of the cartel, the election cartel.
Right. Exactly.
And so we've got to get our act together. The the biggest frustration that I have are the people that we're constantly having those squirrel moments where Someone says squirrel and you look the other way, you look this way. And we have very little patience for working our process and seeing it through. This solution has to come from the ground up. It will not, we will not win through a lawsuit. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah.
We're not going to win because Trump is in office and then all of a sudden it's going to be heaven on earth. We saw how the deep state came around him and tried to neutralize every single thing that he did. Exactly. This is about the American people realizing that if we're going to call ourselves we the people, it better be more than a bumper sticker.
Amen.
So if we get rid of the machines at a local county level, guess what you've done there? You've earned the next challenge of counting your own paper ballots in your backyard. And if you've done that, well, then you might as well show up to those local meetings every 2 weeks where they set your zoning. They make sure that, the discussions over school board curriculum. We have abdicated our responsibility in local communities. And then we cry foul when we don't recognize the communities that we live in. But it's really locally that everyone should be marshaling resources, because it's your local clerk that certifies those tabulators that run our ballots through them, not the SOS, not your governor, not the corrupt Marxist. It's a clerk that certifies that machine for use. So what happens if we showed up in numbers and saying, look, you can't certify that? That's not a trustworthy machine. It's a canvassing board at the county level that certifies your post-election results. It's not the president. It's not the boogeyman. It's not George Soros. What happens if we showed up by the thousands to these local meetings saying, look, unless you can fulfill your responsibility to guarantee us that these votes are absolutely accurate, we're going to ask you to withhold certification. Exactly. And it's going to take that type of buy-in in 3,147 counties to reclaim the republic and start afresh. But if anything short of that, it's just a Band-Aid fix and kicking the can down the road. And I don't think we're going to be able to last that long. I think it's really November or bust for this country.
Yeah, without a doubt. I would agree with you, David. And you point out that local is where the rubber meets the road. And that's where change can happen with rapidity. I mean, if we're waiting, for something at a federal level, then here it is, as you say. I mean, they're experts at kicking the can down the road. We have no business even being in their field of play, but our field of play is our hometown, and we have the hometown advantage if we exercise it, right?
Yeah, well, and I think the thing that's holding us back is that we're really good at coaching up other people, but not doing the work ourselves. We're always exporting our advocacy to people that are already spread thin. Yeah. And look, I've traveled 47 states in the last 2.5 years, and it's the same tale wherever I go. It's 5, 6, 10 people doing all the work in local counties, while everyone else watches and complains. They get on social media, they might mix it up in the comment section, but when it comes to showing up and actually representing families and communities and saying no more, they're nowhere to be found. And unfortunately, the only thing that's going to get their attention is continued suffering at the hands of an administration that seems to welcome an invasion at the border, that welcomes immorality in our schools, and welcomes this chaos-driven way of doing elections. And so, I'm imploring people, go out there and get a copy of the latest edition of New American magazine. They had myself and many other experts featured on diagnosing the problem. Watch Let My People Go to see just how urgent the issue is, and then do something about it. And what I've been asking folks to do is, go to your local meetings. Don't treat them like they're a death sentence. I mean, we should welcome the idea that we have a country where we can govern our local affairs by simply showing up. And but it's going to take something that's akin to the 1960s civil rights era movement, where people, when they fought for equality, they were locking arms, they were sprayed with water cannons, and they held fast until the government said, okay, we've got a problem on our hands. And right now, I don't think the government institutions truly thinks they have a problem on their hand, because we still don't show up.
Right.
Or when we do show up, we're showing up to a buzzsaw that is a rigged election system. And so we think in things in terms of like election day is the Super Bowl. You got to go to these meetings locally. That's like a regular season game.
Exactly.
You don't get to the Super Bowl unless you win some regular season games, get to the playoffs, and start improving the terrain. And part of improving the terrain is going to counties, removing open-ended systems. And we've seen victories along the way, not enough. But this is not, hey, we've really got to get our act together by November. It's like, let's do something today.
Exactly.
Let's get something done tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
No, you're exactly right, David Clements, because look they're taking full advantage of this. I mean, they've used January 6 prisoners kind of as a scare tactic. I mean, if they could, they'd probably hang them all out on some freeway passageway. But we're reminded that so many of the January 6 patriots remain in jail, have been in there for over 300 days, moved from one penitentiary to another, one gulag to another. I mean, to the point that they're even saying, hey, look, send us to Gitmo. We'll be better treated at Gitmo than we will be here in these jails here in America as American citizens.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I mean, it's the greatest travesty I think any of us have witnessed. And yet the media doesn't cover it. So we've got this surreal thing where the abuses from a civil rights standpoint have never been greater than what our countrymen are experiencing.
Well, it's the people are fearing government more than government fearing people, aren't you saying?
Well, there's that. And there's also, again, we get no help from the conservative ink types. Every time there's a protest, people like Charlie Kirk and many others are saying, stand down, don't go protest because you're going to have another J6. And I'm sitting there going, well, wait a minute. Do you understand how the First Amendment works?
Right.
The First Amendment is really only applicable when there is a grievance. We don't ever gather. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No worries.
We don't gather in times of plenty. We only have the need to assemble and gather when we have to petition a tyrannical government.
Exactly.
And so that's the only time that we do it. And so when we're told don't stand up, you're suggesting that there is a time that's actually safe to do so. And that's a fiction. Yeah. Of course, it's going to be dangerous to stand up to a tyrannical government.
Exactly. And like you say, if we don't do it now, then when? It's that old axiom. The Bible says you can pay me now or pay me later. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, it talks about the deferred time. What happens when things aren't reconciled right away? They get much more complicated and much more painful to resolve. But we must come together. We must take a stand and en masse. I mean, just like and even when you go back, and I started to say, just like the early patriots did, but even back in that time, it wasn't, David. It wasn't that they had 100% agreement. They didn't. But it took leadership. It took a group of men, and including women, that were so sold out on this American idea. And the good news about this is that we're not back 250 years ago. We're here today that already has a country that came up with a constitution, declared our independence. We need the idea is that yes, we need to be revived because at one point we were revived, right? And so it's not like we're starting with a blank sheet of paper.
No, you're right. It's the more that I see the courage of the modern day founding father, I have to think that the founding fathers didn't have it all figured out either. What I'm saying is, it was tyranny. It was King George continuing to put his thumb on, at the time, British subjects. These were American colonialists. And you have to remember that there's olive branch petition after petition being sent to the king. And it was basically them confronted with a situation that I don't know if anything will work. I don't think we can appeal to Parliament to be restored.
Right.
And when you're confronted with that scenario, you have to start counting the cost on, am I willing to risk my life?
Yeah.
And so it's not like you had the 1776 spirit, and it was just there. You had decades of incremental subversion and erosion of rights, even amongst the American colonialists. And they finally had a moment where they were fed up. And then out of being fed up, you had the greatest experiment that was born through a revolution. But it wasn't without risk. And if people want to see something in 2024 that rivals that, it's simple. The only thing that separates us from our heritage is, are you willing to die for
Exactly.
the promises that were enshrined in our Declaration of Independence?
Mhm. Well, it's kind of like an interesting comparison is if you look what's happening in Israel right now, in the Gaza, right? You had people that were willing and voted 80% to vote for Hamas. Hamas does this incredible, horrible act on peaceful living Jews on the other side of the border there, and they massacre over 1,400 Jews in the most horrific manner whatsoever. And what did the Palestinians do? They cheered on the rape. They cheered on the attacks and the dismemberment of Jews. Body parts were being kicked up the dirt road there in the streets of Gaza like soccer balls. They cheered it on. Well, wait a minute. Where are really, if you're really interested in freedom and peace, where's that represented? It has not been represented in one moment, at least from what I am seeing. And yet the international community wants Israel to roll over and basically, subject themselves to a people that want to see Israel, totally eliminated.
Yeah, it's a complicated puzzle for sure,
Mhm.
because you have the equivalent of the deep state in Israel, just like we have it here, right?
Mhm.
And so I struggle with this, where we've got a propaganda wing where it seems like war is the end goal for many. So I guess I struggle with that, because I mean, as a Christian,
Mhm.
I believe that we stand with Israel and we bless this chosen nation. But I also find it odd that after Ukraine became a much more unpopular battlefield, um, it seems like Israel was propped up for another place where we're going to have perpetual war. And so I just wish we would spend more time focusing on our own problems. And when I see spending packages from, Mike Johnson, and
Mhm.
you've got aid going to Ukraine, you've got aid going to Israel, you got aid going everywhere except for our own border.
Exactly.
And how are we going to even advocate for our allies like Israel when we are not securing the homeland, right? That's so. I mean, it just seems like we're living in an upside down world where, um, we've got the printing press, the digital printing press. We're deficit spending out the wazoo. If we didn't have the reserve currency standard here in America, we would have seen Weimar Republic-like inflation.
Mhm.
And and I just got back from a trip in California where they're running a debt that's in excess of $200 billion. They don't have any money.
I know. Yeah.
So, so yeah, I mean, at some point, when is enough going to be enough?
Yeah, exactly. Well, David, as we wrap things up here, we got about 6 minutes, and again, relevant, to these voting machines. Um, you know, I'm with you. I just think they lack credibility. I think when they went to the Hill, and there was investigation on this, and it was so frustrating to me because I think that in this particular case, I think they were interviewing the CEO of Dominion, and he flat out lied about there being a modem in the machine. That he says there's no way that these machines had any kind of internet connectivity until one of the legislatures said, well, look at here, that's a modem that connects you to the internet. The guy was flat out lying, and here we are, why they were able to go on and live another day beyond this, and then end up suing Fox News even for an incredible amount of money. I don't know. This is, like you said, it's an upside down world in which we live in. That I guess the bureaucratic power base is expecting that America just go along to get along, and we accept the unreasonable. But it's too brain damaging to sit there and continue to accept that which is unreasonable, isn't it?
Yeah. Like I said, every podcast, every event, in some ways, it devolves into us kind of commiserating on the corruption that we see. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And there's no sexy solution that if you file this magic lawsuit or do this or gather on this podcast, that all of a sudden you're going to see sanity. This is about doing the hard sacrificial work of going to this place that I call the gap. It's a place of interposition. It's ground zero, and it has to be done at the local level, because you're not going to convince an entire captured legislature to just do what you say.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, Jordan Peterson was very famous for saying, before solving the world's problems, how about cleaning your own room?
Yeah.
And we don't like cleaning up the mess that's right before us. And until we're willing to confront the city councilor or the county commissioner about the abject lawlessness that we're experiencing, we're kind of exercising this gallows-like complainers humor, where we gather and we comment. Yeah, you see how corrupt Biden was? Did you see the corrupt thing that Biden did today? And after doing this for 4 years, I think my utility in coming on these shows is to let people know nothing else will work other than the American people climbing back into the trenches saying, okay. And I guess I would leave your audience with this is, I just can't imagine my grandfather, and you probably think about your grandfather, that we'd be in this mess. And there's something different. What was it about our fathers and grandfathers that were different from the men today? Is that they spoke plainly, and when they said something, they meant it.
Right.
And you could expect them to show up. And if they went to a place, they weren't going to be treated like garbage by quote unquote public servants. And they wouldn't let our universities be run over by Hamas terrorist groups. They wouldn't allow this nonsense. And one of the biggest problems that I saw with January 6th wasn't the fact that people gathered. The biggest problem is that there should have been 73 more million people there. And we should have never left until we solved the problem. But I digress.
Well, David, do you think that because people are so focused on the federal issue, that they overlook the ground floor issue, that is the local level? Because what happens federally is a manifestation of what's at the root, and what's at the root is the local level, don't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, we've lost sight of the 10th Amendment. We've lost sight of separation of powers. When it comes to domestic lawmaking, that was always supposed to be a local issue. Article 1, Section 8 sets out the 18 and only 18 enumerated powers that Congress is supposed to touch. And if you really focus on what those powers delineate, it's free trade and national defense. That's it.
Right. Exactly.
Everything else was supposed to be done through local governance. And the more local, the better. That's something that's shown heavily in the Federalist Papers by Madison. So we've abdicated that, and we want basically the equivalent of a king. We want a federal king to solve all of our problems. And in the process, we've created great apathy. It's very, very reminiscent of 1 Samuel. The people of Israel,
we want a king.
They wanted a king.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, we're going to give you a king. And with that, you're going to see all forms of slavery. And we did the same thing in our country, in our constitutional republic. We wanted a king to solve all of our problems. And now we look around and you get what your apathy gets you. And
Well, Professor, that's a perfect way to wrap things up. I mean, you hit the point. You hit the nail right on the head. America wants a king, and they've abdicated, and this is what they got. You know, the bureaucracy is their king, and they're grumbling. But you know, the grief to happiness ratio may cause a movement here to where you know, people will get up off of their couches and do something. And it all starts at the local level. And this is something that we remind our listeners and our viewers all the time. So, Professor, thank you again for your time. Thank you for coming on. You know, God bless you and you and your family. I just pray that God's hedge of protection would continue to be about you, and that I know that you see him as your provider, and may he richly provide for you and for your family, for all that you've invested, you know, for everybody's freedom here. And I thank you for doing that.
You're welcome, Bill, and thank you for having me.
David Clements, the award-winning business law professor and prosecutor who has passionately pursued the truth that over now it looks like 70% clearly a mandate of Americans are demanding regarding the 2020 presidential elections. The pursuit of truth has cost him his professorship and income, and we're grateful for the professor for coming on the show, and I'm grateful for having you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on the show, you can check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. Have yourself a blessed day.